about ChatGPT, so we said, why not call in some of our colleagues to share their experiences? So it's kind of a free-flowing conversation. So we're delighted to have Paul Vance, Head of Resourcing with KPMG, Siobhan Scanlon, Early Careers Manager with Musgraves, and then we've Maria Laffey, Head of Careers in the Careers Development Centre in University of Galway. And Maria has presented to us, thankfully, earlier on the year on a session on ChatGPT. And at the end then, Olga Sullivan, who's on our CPD group, did a little bit of research and also fed in some of the work that Debs did in ATU on, I suppose, students' response to it. So we'll have that at the end. And as Caroline said, if everyone's okay, this session will be recorded and we'll have it up on the YouTube. So I'll now hand you over to our speakers. And maybe, does anyone want to go first or to share their experiences with it? Or will I leave it to yourselves?
I'm going to try and tell my grads now and let someone else answer the question.
Marie, do you want to go maybe first? Maybe a little bit.
I don't mind going first and saying what we're doing here. And so, you know, actually, we were at the Head of Service conference in Washington last week, and Paul, one of your competitors, Dan Black, who's responsible for the global recruitment for EY, and I spoke to him about it and said, "What's the?" I'd be interested to hear your view, Paul. You know, from KPMG, and it said, "What's their view on you know, grads using AI to prepare, you know, and same for your search fund to prepare for applications?" And he said, "Oh, we welcome it. We actually want them to use it." Because it really helps them to articulate their work experience, their skills. But he said we still want to see their personality in their applications as well. So it was interesting to see that they were actually running sessions for grads in the US on how to use AI for their applications so that they could support the applications for graduates. So it was interesting that that was their view, that they were really, really open to graduates, because from a placements perspective here in Galway, we've had employers who haven't shortlisted anyone because they felt, oh no, that was AI generated. We're not shortlisting anyone. So it was very conflicting, you know, different opposing views. So it'd be very interesting to hear, you know, from yourselves, because one of the things we do is I've designed a session I've shared with others around using ChatGPT for your recruitment journey. And I spoke at an advanced HE conference recently and looked at all the touch points in that recruitment journey and the prompts that students could leverage, or how they could leverage ChatGPT to help them on that journey from, you know, I don't know what to do with my degree or what's next with my degree, to, oh, now I know what job, but now I know the employer. So now I need to tailor my CV to that job. I've got an interview. Here's the interview questions from the job description, and here's how I can network and ideas for networking. So all the different touch points on the recruitment journey. And so we cover that in a session with students. But one of the things we say is about their authentic self in ChatGPT, and a question on how do you do that? How do you tell them to put their authentic self in that? So it's their language, it's their tone, it's how they speak. That should be reflected back in the application. And then we tell them to be conscious of their data privacy and data protection. And the other thing we tell them is about verify the information that you come back.
Yeah.
But also
three dots more, and then
it didn't work for me.
there's someone talking there. So verify the information, but then also look for that unconscious bias, because, you know, the data sets are created by us. ChatGPT uses this information from, it's scraped from every part of the internet, and how they need to ensure that the recommendations they're going aren't inherently biased to a certain group, and so on. So they're the four things that we would recommend to students in the class, that it's not just about cut and paste in, that these are the things that they have to consider. So I suppose that's what we do in terms of ChatGPT, and we've also run ChatGPT for and I did it for student services.
Sorry, this is Ireland here now.
With regards how you can use it in your day-to-day as a careers professional or a student services professional as well, and work more efficiently. So that's what we've involved. But it'd be very interesting to hear from yourself, Siobhan and Paul, your views on graduates using or students using ChatGPT for applications.
Thanks, Marie. Just before Siobhan and Paul, if maybe people could put on the mute, if that's okay, on their own settings. Thanks. Sorry, Siobhan. Thanks.
No, don't worry, no. Look, I was just kind of nodding away in agreement with you there, Marie, because I suppose we've had just a couple of individuals who've said to us in terms of having used ChatGPT as part of the application process, not specifically for the grad program, it was for an intern role that we had advertised. It kind of started off a conversation. I know, Angela, we spoke about this briefly last year when you reached out to me on this. And I'm happy to share that experience with you as well. But I suppose there's a lot of conversation in our own business as well in terms of the use of AI. And I mentioned there just as you joined, and that we had a session this morning with our HR function with over 100 colleagues on it. And we had our head of IT AI come in and talking about responsible use of AI within our business and all those different things. And it's just moving so quickly. And I suppose really, to your point, ChatGPT is a tool.
Yeah.
And as such, it's a tool. Once you know how to use it responsibly and how you modify that, I think absolutely it's an invaluable tool for them to be able to use it. And I think it's just, as you say, it's having the kind of different caveats or touch points along the way as you go through that process to ensure that they're actually reading what is being generated, that it makes sense, that it resonates with them in terms of their own voice and things like that. And actually, as part of the research that we're doing in terms of our own selection process at the moment, because we do have quite a structured process where we'd have online assessments, we have video interviews, we have assessment centres. So there's probably a few limited points where ChatGPT can come in. I'm happy to discuss those as well. But certainly, I suppose we have to be cognizant that people are going to be using it more and more. And how can we advise them to use it responsibly? And there's a really interesting document out there, and I'll share it with you afterwards. A call, you may have come across it already. It's an organisation called Arctic Shores, and they have developed a really useful toolkit for employers and for job seekers in terms of how to use ChatGPT and AI responsibly in terms of that process. And to your point, Marie, it's absolutely talking about. It's a tool, but here as an organization, here's how you can educate your candidates in terms of how to use it in the best way as you go through that. And it's a very, very useful document, and I'm absolutely happy to share that with you.
Great.
Yeah, and I mean, I've used it myself just in terms of experimenting, not with any company material because it is open source. So therefore, it's verboten in terms of its use for any Musgrave material or things like that. But certainly, I think it was really useful in terms of just external data, as you say, to get a summary or just those aspects. And one of the ways we came across it in an application last year was we had advertised for a marketing intern, and the candidate who was successful in getting the role actually said to us, like, Joe, when preparing for the interview, I took the job description, I put it into ChatGPT and asked what kind of questions would I be asked. And she said, like, literally 2 of the questions that he was asked came up as part of that. But I think the key thing is in terms of how she used that then to be able to give us examples from her own experience. Yeah. I think that's the key point for them to be able to understand. For the vast majority of employers, there's still going to be a competency-based interview at the end of that process. And ChatGPT can be hugely important in terms of, taking a scenario they may have and helping them to structure that in a slightly different way, or using the STAR concept. But that it's just how to not just regurgitate information as well from that side. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you're so right, it's a tool. And a lot of people are afraid of it, but if you think Google was a tool and the internet is a tool and we use those, so I totally agree. And Paul, what about yourself?
Yeah, echo an awful lot of what Siobhan just said. I suppose we first recognized it in the autumn milk round. We got about 4,000 applications. I would say about 25% had obvious ChatGPT paragraphs. I would imagine that there was at least another 50% who actually had the cop on to change the language, and about those 25% didn't. So they literally cut and paste. And it looks terrible without having a personalized edit on it, which doesn't take much, but you can recognize it. It's like black and white in terms of the difference between what someone would write versus what ChatGPT would write. We definitely debated about, if it came down to a split decision on what candidates we'd select for interview, and if we had to make a tough decision, would we send through the ChatGPT person or the person that we think wrote the authentic application? And in the absence of doing that, we decided that we would apply our own principles of, if it's a good application, we'll put it through. But certainly less of those candidates were offered a position by the interviewers because interviewers resented it, because they didn't think they made the same effort that other people made. So there's certainly a lesson for students, and an acknowledgement by firms. I think at this stage everybody's using it, but for God's sake, personalize it. So use it as a tool, as mentioned here already, right? But personalize it. It just didn't. It didn't look like KPMG was special, and you're always looking for that in an application form. And it just looked like I'm banging in as many applications to as many employers as possible, and we're just another one. And that's all very well until you're sitting in front of the interviewer and they're grilling you on why do you want to work for KPMG when you've not really demonstrated that effort to date. So you've demonstrated good academics, wherever it is, but you haven't demonstrated in your application form, which is all the interviewer has to go by. Strangely enough, and that was October. Strangely enough, the internship applications came in with 3,700 of them. Much less obvious, I would say less than 10% were ChatGPT in terms of that we could recognize. So what that probably told me is, or what we deduced from that is, the students are getting smarter, so they know they need to personalize it. So they probably heard the feedback from multiple people and are probably savvy enough to say, okay, I better personalize this thing. So working off that assumption, but not, I suppose they're not getting the reward if they don't personalize that interview, but we're not screening them out. Sorry, there's somebody else calling me here. And I think the everything that was said by Maria and Siobhan there, being, expecting students to embrace it, but then, please keep the personalized thing, and as we often say to students for doing interview skills training, what sets you apart from your peers? And certainly ChatGPT can do that, but only if you personalize it and use it to your advantage. Interesting enough, I suppose not just ChatGPT. I suppose what we're seeing now is, at the beginning of this call, you guys were saying, "Oh, we're going to record it." We have Microsoft Copilot being launched in KPMG, and that will create interview notes, which should give us better data. So I suppose technology will kick out better data and better assessment of candidates as a result, because conversations get forgotten. And we're trialing that at the moment. Probably because interviewers are terrible at giving us interviews, but also as a better way of comparing candidates when there's tough choices to be made. So I think technology is going to play a role for the students in the upfront application, but it's also going to take a role then in any Teams interviews, which weirdly enough, there's still a lot, because so many students now are taking Erasmus, taking a gap year, or taking whatever it is. And even on experienced professionals, about 50 to 60% of our interviews are on Teams, which is quite surprising, given that our default is in person. So echo everything that's said. I think the students are getting smarter. I think they're improving how they're using ChatGPT, and I think the applications that came in for the internships in February versus the ones that came in October for the grad roles, very, very different, and it's a similar type of audience, if you can imagine. So I just imagine that students are getting smarter in their use of it.
I do think it does depend on terms of the application or selection process that you have in place and different stages as part of that. So, for example, we don't look at a CV until the very last stage. And we don't have cover letters, our application form, we don't have any paragraph saying why Musgrave or anything that from that perspective of it. So for us, there's probably limited points that where ChatGPT could come in. So if you take the application form, it's just bare bones in terms of their details and where they're applying for. Then once they get to that stage, it's the online assessments. Now, with the online assessments, again, just I'm doing some bit of research. The research is showing at the moment that from a ChatGPT perspective, it's of little value for numerical reasoning assessments. It could be more beneficial for verbal assessments for some candidates. I suppose it depends on the instrument that you use, because those instruments are timed, and some of them may not have limitations in terms of copy paste into ChatGPT, those different types of elements as well. And even just following that, I just went back and I did a quick synopsis in terms of our candidates' performance in terms of verbal assessment scores from the last campaign. So we would have had over 2,000 completing those verbal assessments that back then, and versus back in 2018. And interestingly enough, there was actually a slightly lower average score of the high performers in terms of ChatGPT. So if they're using it there, it's not coming through. And to be honest, I don't know enough about our instrument, because again, this only occurred to me at the start of this week. I'm not organized enough to actually check with our providers to say, is it ChatGPT proof or not? But even if it was, I think there's an interesting piece there to say, okay, that's one element, because if you get through the online assessments, if it gets you over the benchmark, that's fine. You then have a video interview stage. So it's an asynchronous video. We give you one video question in advance. And again, it's a competency question. So they have to have a specific example that they can pull through. So it's not like they can, and Paul, you're very aware, like as experienced recruiters, you know straight off if somebody's telling you an example that they're reading off the screen, or that's true or not as you go through that. And then the second two questions pop up, and they have 3 opportunities in which to record that. So theoretically, you could say they could very quickly run an example through ChatGPT to be able to do that. Because I reviewed the majority of those video interviews last year, very little evidence of people running it through a simulator like that. It was very much in terms of they were kind of giving their experience, they were recounting their experience. So you see who had prepared, you can see some who were a bit nervous in the process and things like that. So at that stage is then only then at that stage when we start shortlisting for the assessment centres, you say, okay, right, how you take the online assessment, you take the interview score, then you start looking at CVs and you start looking at academic backgrounds where relevant and things like that for the shortlisting process. And again, we don't have a cover letter. So, and even if there was a cover letter, to be honest with you, don't pay much heed to it. It's sort of the CV in terms of kind of the practical experience, that the kind of key elements that we would look at as coming through. And then within the assessment centre, our assessment centres are virtual as well. So they are conducted over Teams. Again, theoretically, you could say they could copy and paste. There's 2 activities that they see on the day, so the text element to those. So you could say, technically, they could potentially copy and paste that into ChatGPT and give me a summary in terms of, I'm sure you all know the desert island exercise. It's a simulation of one of those, and they say, okay, right, tell me who the best person could be. But it's not about the outcome of the exercise. It's about how they conduct themselves as part of that. It's about how they contribute, how they influence, and all those different elements, which ChatGPT doesn't tell you what to do, or that's an aspect. So you would see that it's limited enough in terms of how they can bring through that. But when you start to look at it as a tool, you can absolutely see there's potential there for it to be able to improve from an inclusion diversity perspective. And the research is bearing that out as well, and that absolutely it's supporting more of those candidates to get through to interviews where they may not necessarily have done so in the past, because it's starting to level the playing field for them to be able to open that up, and that can only be a good thing. Again, depending on how those AI systems are built, then there's, to your point, Marie, there's so many different biases that could potentially be built in as well. And there have been examples, obviously, of biases which have worked against candidates as well, that side. So I don't know, it's a really interesting space, and I don't think anyone has the answer in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow. But I think as employers, you have to be open-minded, because I mean, if people have the savvy to be able to go up and use it, and to be able to use it in a way that can help them to bring through themselves, improve themselves, and authentically present themselves authentically, then they're using the tools at their disposal in a smart way, and that's what you're looking for in a good employee.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I would say we've just completed a work placement round with UCD, where we've interviewed 160 candidates. The standard of the applications in terms of how it was written was much better than the previous year. And I think the students are using it to their advantage, where the quality of the application is much better. There's a cover letter along with the application form. The cover letters are excellent. Like, you couldn't teach how good they are, but they're personalized. I did not read one application that wasn't personalized. And so credit to the students, obviously getting a little bit of help because they were so good. And just to Siobhan's point, very often, so often actually, poorly written application forms before ChatGPT, didn't see any. The reader, as I say, in the autumn, ChatGPT picked them out. But since that, no bad grammar, very good style of writing, so I think the students are probably seeing the value of it and leveraging it very well. And then the final point being, certainly those students that may have either a language problem, who maybe are international students, or people with dyslexic or whatever it is, can certainly not point them out on the applications like we would have in the past. So without looking at the name, you would understand that somebody maybe had a challenge from a language perspective, and that's a real positive from that perspective. Where the student obviously feels as though they can use technology then to get through probably a screening process that might have kicked them out, depending on the employer or how understanding they were to badly written answers.
And that's a really good point, Paul, because I know from our sessions, and I don't know if others are running here, feel free to chime in, but we would see high numbers of international students attending our ChatGPT workshop, and solely because of the language barrier. And you know, the difficulties they have in writing a CV for the Irish labour market. So they tend to, we've seen very high numbers, and where they're leveraging it and using it to be able to articulate what they have. And interestingly enough, like we use, I know a lot of use it as well, but we have CareerSet, which is our CVI builder tool that we would have students put their CV through. They've integrated ChatGPT into their tool, so students can get 5 prompts from ChatGPT to be able to help to refine their CV for applications or cover letters as well. So like, it's interesting to see that the tools that AI tools that are built for this, they're actually integrating it as well. I think they're only kicking the can down the line in terms of
True.
their survival, but because it's, you know, effectively, and I've started to use co-pilots as well. I'm finding it particularly interesting that, you know, if you have that at Microsoft 365 account, you can leverage it across different. But what you said there around using the interview notes and
Yes.
helping to use that, that's very interesting around, say, for candidates. And is that linked into your Microsoft Teams, and that it's Copilot's actually creating the notes for you from the Teams, Paul? Is that how you're using it? Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say we're in trial phase at the moment. So obviously you need to be a little bit careful that it isn't kicking out too much information that is worthless and or maybe not fit for purpose. So just need to see how that is. But I think it's a little bit of a game changer, particularly for interviewers who hate writing interview notes, and have done quite a number of interviews. You know, you might have done 5 interviews, and it's a great way then being able to compare with data, as opposed to, oh, I met Johnny and Mary and I can't remember who's who after the end of the day, you know. So at least it could actually be a better tool, as I say, for distinguishing the best candidates. Yeah,
exactly. I think one of the things from the conference last week, I'm going to put the link in the chat, because Siobhan, you were saying, you know, they're in assessment centres, as the online video that they have to do, and a video that was shared last week with us was, I put the link there, and where they actually have AI apply. I don't know if you know the site, and the phone is sitting there and it's listening to the questions that the employers are asking, and all the conversation, and then it's producing the answer for the student. You know, so even if they're recording that asynchronous video, they can get the question and get the answer in real time to get back. So I thought it's if you haven't seen the video, it's fascinating to watch it. I just put the link in the chat there for people. Just and things you were saying, and Angela, I know you're coming in, but like one of the things, like one of the things in terms of, say, ChatGPT, is that there's several ways for them to personalize it and to de-ChatGPT it, in the sense that they can actually give ChatGPT several examples of their own writing and say, so I want you to output it now in my writing style. And so, you know, or there's other AI apps that they can say, de-ChatGPT this for me, you know, humanize this output for me. So there's so many different ways that they've realized, like, I'll give you an example. One of the things, we have a careers and employability module here that we give for arts and science. And at the end of the semester, we ask them to reflect back on what they learned, because the whole semester was about self-awareness and for career exploration. And we asked them to write a reflection, was worth 10%. And within, you know, my first few, I'd say, Paul, similar to you, I had 25% that I knew straight away. They hadn't bothered to change the Zs, right, in the answers. And there was words like honed skills. They don't use words like that, right? And so I cut and pasted out to ChatGPT, and I said, did you write this? And it came back and said, no. So then I said, oh, they think we're not that smart. So I went out to Gemini Bard and I said, did you write this? And they came back, yes. And here's the format I actually wrote it in for them. It was so easy to see, you know. But they are getting smarter in terms of humanizing it, and in terms of you know, there are apps out there that, but like ChatGPT, co-pilots, you know, as long as they give their style of writing, it can actually output it in their style of writing. You know, so
I think though the danger is that, you know, from an employer's perspective, that unless you have good interviewers and good interview skills, that you could hire somebody with capabilities that weren't matching up to everything you taught.
Totally.
And you could be influenced with a fabulous application. And not every interviewer, as I often tell candidates, not every interviewer are skilled interviewers. Some are not so good. And yeah, you could find yourself actually with a profile of candidate that isn't desirable at all. So I don't think employers probably haven't felt that yet, but maybe going to feel that.
Yeah. Angela, you're looking to come in there.
Yeah, well, one thing after listening to all you speak, I was going to ask, and you've answered it, Paul. Are employers now training their interviewers differently? You know, are you doing a lot of different? Are you training your interviewers differently now because of ChatGPT?
Not yet, but it will be.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I had a meeting actually this morning with my team, not because this meeting was coming up, by the way, but on that very thing, to redesign our interviewer training. We host it 4 times a year, and it's outdated. It's 2019, and it needs to be 2025. You know, so it's our training hasn't factored this in, and problem is, very few interviewers are, you know, doing all of the interviewing. It's everybody's interviewing, and therein lies the challenge. Whereas if you have a more select few, you can really get them on it. So I definitely have a fear for it from an interviewer perspective. But yeah, so the training is going to be redone. How effective it's going to be, I don't know. I caught a little bit with, as I said at the beginning, you know, some student has worked really hard, and the application, okay, maybe they were under time pressures, and you know, obviously use technology. You know, do you disadvantage that student? You know, it's the $1 million question, so I don't know the answer. And then likewise, there's a lazy student who use technology to have a fabulous application get rewarded unfairly in some ways as well. So you know, I mean, like, you know, one of our questions is, you know, why do you want to work at KPMG? It's a pretty easy answer. Even if you put it into Google, you get a good answer. Never mind technology or AI. So, you know, I do think the interviewer is maybe not taking things at face value would be more important in the future, and really going after it. And, you know, we've all competency-based questions and all of that, but, you know, sometimes you can be swayed because the application is fabulous. Looking forward to meeting this candidate, and here we go. You know, it's a hire unless they tell me otherwise, almost. You know, and we're all talking. You know, we all have bias built in there, and the machine is going to give us bias as well. And I don't know what the answer is going to be. I think it'll be interesting to see where we get the training right, but then it'll be interesting to see where we get it. We get the implementation of that right as well.
And like, as for our perspective from a graduate side, it's because we have a specific time frame when we do the recruitment. We'd always do an assessor interview skills training beforehand. So we haven't focused on ChatGPT heretofore, but certainly will be featuring in the next lot as we go through that. But I suppose one of the things, and to Paul's point, absolutely, you always kind of challenge in terms of the amount of people interviewing in the business. It's how good and how frequently are they doing interviews, how good they are in terms of interrogating the candidate. As that sounds really bad, but you know what I mean, in terms of going down and the follow-on questions, and not just taking the question at surface value. And I suppose from a graduate perspective, we can circumvent that by, I suppose, ensuring we have our HR recruiter with every person who's not an experienced recruiter from that side of it. So that's one way that we look to address that. I'm going to be a bit controversial there, Paul, and I say, look, sometimes the lazy student can be the most efficient because they'll find the easiest way to get to do something in that. And I'm not saying go to necessarily hire that person, but I mean, if there's somebody again who, for example, may have come late to the game in terms of figuring out what companies they want to work for, and all of a sudden it's kind of like, actually, I want to understand a bit more how to do that. I think it boils down in terms of how they perform, obviously, within the selection process as well as part of that. And I say that on the basis, there's actually a colleague of mine, it's nothing to do with ChatGPT, but just there's a couple of candidates we've met over the years who've actually gone on to roles in the business, but not in the graduate program, because there's one guy in particular, and he came in as an intern. Everybody's raving about him. He's absolutely brilliant. He didn't get past the online assessments, but we made an exception for him because everyone was telling us he's brilliant. He didn't get past the video benchmark, but again, everyone's saying he's brilliant. He has to be at the assessment center. And I'm at this stage, like, the process works for a reason. And so he's failing these 2 points, then I've got concerns to go through. He got through the assessment center and just he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't deal with the pressure of it. It just, he has a mentality when it comes to interviews. He freezes, and yeah, failed miserably. But thankfully he went on and did another role within the business. He'd done traveling. He's actually now rejoined us again, which is brilliant to see. But actually he went for another opportunity internally recently, and he still has that interview blankness. He just something freezes within him. So there are some people, I think sorry, that's just the point in terms of that some people will come to those type of experiences. So I don't know. I think when you look at the interview skills, absolutely, as interviewers, there are so many things to be aware of and to be watching out for. But fundamentally, I say you have to look in terms of, as an organization, what are the kind of key things that you're looking for? What are those competencies or skills, or however what your process is based, and say, okay, how were they demonstrating them? And if they've used ChatGPT to prepare a question from their own experience, to Paul's point, if you've got a skilled recruiter, they will know if it's a real experience or not, because the candidate will be able to say, yes, I can go down into more detail. I can tell you exactly what happened, who we were in that team, and all those different skills. I think that's really going to be your make or break piece. The concern you could have, though, is that you have really good candidates missing out, not getting to that stage, or that somebody who might taken that point, taken the place of somebody who should have been there instead. I'm sorry, I'm babbling there. I obviously need more coffee, but my point, I hope you understand the point that I came through in that.
Yeah,
segment, yeah.
No problem. And how do people feel, maybe if we open it up, or maybe Olga, if you're in a position, Olga, as say, did some research with students to see there. So even if Olga shared some of the work herself and Debs did there, and then we can open it up to the wider audience just for some questions, if that's okay. Thanks.
I'll just share my screen very quickly, if that's all right. Just one sec there now. So we really just wanted to kind of get a sense of, I suppose, what students are thinking. It's a very short kind of pulse survey. We had 422 responses. So just looking, I suppose, at the top level, we were really just trying to find out how comfortable students are in, I suppose, being around, sorry, I'll just move this over here, just how comfortable they were using AI as a tool. And I suppose the 53% of the students were either extremely or somewhat comfortable. So I suppose it's kind of, and there was only 24% that were somewhat uncomfortable and extremely uncomfortable. So I suppose we're kind of moving into the era of, and I suppose people becoming more aware and comfortable. And then the next question we asked was how students, did they use it in their day-to-day life? So 13% of students would have said that they used it a great deal or a lot, and 22% of students said they wouldn't use it at all. 37% of students said they used it a little bit. Now, one would have to say, I suppose, we're asking the question, we'd hope that they're telling the truth, but we can only go on the data that we have. And we just asked one final question then, just in terms of particularly to career activities, job searches, CV feedback, etc. How often did students use it? And 12% used it a great deal or a lot. 44% said they didn't use it at all, and 21% were saying that they used it a little bit. 23% using it a moderate amount. So again, you can see, that it is beginning to creep in, I think. And for those that are using it a moderate amount, they probably are using it a great deal, in fairness. But it's just, we thought it'd be just interesting to just briefly share, I suppose, what students are saying and what they're doing. And, as I said, we had 422 responses, so it's a fairly good, I suppose, representation, we would say. So that's that.
Thanks, Olga. That's great.
It kind of relates to ChatGPT. I suppose the question that kind of comes up for me, it's very longer term piece, is it's a great tool, but if you've got a company that's not using ChatGPT or doesn't have the enterprise version of it, then I suppose it's how do you look at those students in terms of developing their skills so that they don't have a reliance on it from a business perspective, and to be able to use that, because absolutely it's a tool and it's a fantastic tool from that perspective. But if you don't have access to that within your organization, then how are you, or if you're not using it to develop critical thinking skills or writing skills or whatever it may be that you're using that, then I suppose how are we preparing them to ensure that it's going to, firstly, that they're aware that they shouldn't be using it with an organization if their policy is that they don't allow it. Then okay, right, what kind of skills can they build without the use of it? Or how are they reflecting on terms of how the learning that they take from that? They're absolutely, I'm sure, have taken learning from it, but it's just curious in terms of how you see the future of that evolving.
I suppose that's the danger, Siobhan, is that, and even those that are using it a great deal, is that I suppose they lose the confidence in some ways in their own writing abilities, and become over reliant on tools like that. And maybe that's where some of the, I suppose, some of the learning has to come for students. And, you know, I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying in terms of leveling the playing field for some students. You can see that maybe that does have a role in it, but you don't want to kind of see that over-reliance kind of creeping in, and people maybe losing confidence in themselves in, as I say, in their own abilities to write.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Olga, for sharing that.
I just got to add to that as well, because I totally agree in terms of the skills, particularly when it's not available, if they become dependent on it. But one of the things, I read an article recently, and it said ChatGPT is making us readers, right? Because, you know, we have to read what is given back to us, and, you know, particularly if they're looking for references or research in other areas to support what maybe their applications or their studies are, they're having to go out and read that. So I think in some ways then it's building other skills, because you know, a lot of our students, you know, probably wouldn't be great readers. They're the short, you know, screen time, attention, and that's it. When in fact, and that was the research that this particular article had, is that it's actually making readers even out of ourselves, because we're getting, or even coming up with ideas that we wouldn't have thought of, and then expanding us in terms of understanding. So I think that, you know, while there are skills such as writing, I think there's other skills that they definitely, and even to prompt engineer, is the critical thinking of that, you know, to write your prompt engineering, to write the right prompt, to prime it, you have to know how to problem solve in doing that, you know. So I think it will build other skills, I think, as well.
Yeah, and even as you're saying that, I'm kind of just thinking to the point where there's, I don't know, in terms of the nature of the role that you're doing, how much written material do you have to be producing as well of your own kind of thinking, especially the way roles are going. A lot of it is going to be automated or following a process or different elements of that. I suppose where we would see probably some of the challenges coming in at times at the beginning is firstly is probably email communications, and just having confidence in terms of doing that, communicating with people via email. In which case I tell them, actually don't email, just call them. The biggest, if we get ChatGPT to actually train graduates to call people instead, I think it would be absolutely amazing, because that, to be honest, that is probably the biggest stumbling block of them enjoying the business. Get them making calls with little sweets.
Already. They had that before ChatGPT.
If you could cure that, it would be brilliant.
Yeah.
Is it okay to open it up to the wider audience now? If anyone has some questions there, feel free to either turn on your camera and ask it, or maybe put it in the chat, and I can kind of monitor the chat there. If anyone has any questions. Are you asking ChatGPT what question you're going to ask? Or Tara has one here there. Sorry. Actually, Tara, do you want to ask it? Sorry, just trying to go. Oh, yeah, sorry. If applicants are higher quality, how will you select for interview? Not too sure.
Again, if applicants are.
If applicants, if applications are of a higher quality, how will you select for interview? Tara, jump in if I haven't asked that or articulated it the right way. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I suppose everything has changed in the last few years with great inflation from a leaving cert perspective. So it's almost the old rules are gone, and it is really hard. And what we're seeing is, I suppose, I think, well, students are giving you a better standard, better quality application form. They're not doing the research to see where the roles are. So, you know, we've hired 450 grads a year. About 100 in tax, about 200 in audit, about another whatever 150 in consulting, and then there's all these other small roles that would have one or two. Problem is, of course, the candidates are applying for areas that have one or two roles. So and no other choices, that don't have a second or third choice. So what we're finding is we're literally saying no to top candidates because they haven't done the research. So they've done the research and given you a very good application form, but haven't done the research on where are the roles sitting. And that's not to say they shouldn't back themselves, but they don't have a number two. And it's all the money is on black, and if black doesn't come in, you've lost everything. So I think that's one way, unfortunately, that we end up losing candidates or dropping candidates out of the process, where you're somebody on paper anyway, a lesser quality is getting through because they did the research and finding out where are the jobs and where's my best opportunity to get that interview. So I think that's certainly something we're seeing all the time. Too many students are looking for the too few roles and not enough looking for the more obvious or the larger areas. After that, then, I guess there's always differences in terms of applications. While the quality is good, there's always differences in there. Particularly with graduates, you're looking at the academics as well as the quality of the application form. And if all things being even, very often we make tough choices from a gender perspective to make sure we're balancing the pipeline. Not to influence the interviews, by the way. I'm a firm believer in, if you can feed the pipeline with the right demographics, then the interviewers will do the right thing if you've trained them. So you'll end up with the right results. So you're not trying to force anything at interview, but make sure that you're giving whatever proportion it is that you want to give, and whether it's gender or whether it's ethnicity or whatever it is. So sometimes, back to the original question, it does come down to things like that as well when you're screening applications, which can be quite challenging on a student who's done everything right. But as I say, if there was one piece of advice I would give is well, apart from the ChatGPT editing and all of that, is to also use technology to find out where are these jobs. Just because an employer has X number of jobs doesn't mean that you're suited to it. And then even within that, what areas within that, so you might be an A student, but are you good at marketing, or are you better at mathematics or accounting, or whatever that is. And I think not enough students convince you at application front that they're right for you. So we would get, for example, a lot of students with science, engineering, technology, whatever it is, and you want them, but half the time you don't believe them. I know that sounds terrible, but that's what the application form tells you. So while some of the answers are answered very well, questions are answered very well, and the academics are very well done, they maybe not have realized that, okay, I'm coming from a different background than an accounting student or whatever it is, so I need to actually tell them why I'm really interested in this job. And that's something I think is missing, and ends up being at their cost in some cases.
I'd agree in terms of understanding what role they're going for. So we hire 15 graduates each year, so around that kind of figure. So a lot smaller numbers, and as such, I suppose you do have a big pool in terms of trying to bring those people in and make sure you're getting the right candidates coming in. And I suppose for us, because our roles are, we would have roles such as buying roles, supply chain, finance. We have quite detailed information about those job descriptions and opportunities, the requirements for those up on our website. We've got our competencies up there as well. And like that, you would still have people, just because of the name of the company that they want to get in, they haven't considered what the role might be, if they're going to be the right fit for that role, if it's the right opportunity, if they have the right skill sets. Just to give you an example, for marketing, we typically hire one marketing graduate role, and every year we're going to have 500 plus applications for that one marketing role, many of which won't have studied marketing. As we have a criteria of marketing degree or postgraduate qualification or major in marketing, because of the popularity of it, and we still get loads of people applying for that because they feel, oh, marketing is a career for me, without having any background or in relation to that. So it's the process is the process in terms of, if the caliber is higher, then you just raise the bar in terms of the numbers of people you're coming through, because there's a finite number of candidates we can bring through the assessment centre. And you have to take it on the basis of everything that we've seen, assessments, video interviews, and CVs. And it's really on the day then in terms of how they perform and how well informed they are about the organisation and why they want to work there.
Perfect. Emer has come in, but Emer, if it's okay, there's just a question came in before you, if that's okay. Meg was talking about, her question is, how do you feel that CVs would be less relevant in the AI age? Will we rely more on pre-screen activities? Just thinking how best to prepare for the future. So Meg had that question, and then I'll go to you, Emer.
I mean, from my perspective, Sorry,
Yeah,
Paul,
so
go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, to be honest with you, I'd much prefer not to have CVs at all. But I suppose the challenge of that is that you've got to do quite a detailed application form, and then we do have quite a few managers within the business doing interviews who want to have the CV. So there's a culture shift there in terms of changing that mindset in terms of that. What I would say, the good thing with the CV as well, can tell you a bit of insight around the candidates, particularly little quirky things about the interest and things like that. There's always kind of a little surprise that comes through that can actually tell you some really interesting insight about a candidate that may not have come through otherwise. So less relevant. They're not massively relevant right now in our selection process. They serve a purpose in terms of the latter stage of the selection. There's a limited amount of discussion around it within the interview itself. So I would say potentially, yes, it could become less relevant, but within then your internal movement is probably where the CV, in the absence of a system internally that would allow you to be able to do that, I'd say it could be more challenging.
Thank you. And Paul, did you want to say anything on that just before I move on to the next one?
I suppose we're caught in a dilemma. So we got rid of technology out of the interview process or assessment. So we had all of those things. We had a E-tray exercise and we had a written exercise. So 2 different exercises plus 2 interviews on top. So it was rigorous enough. And when Siobhan was talking earlier on about a candidate and the interviewers all saying, oh no, but he or she is great and we want them anyway, regardless of being doing terrible on the psychometric test or whatever it is. So what we found was interviewers were continually going against what the technology was telling them. So I almost feel as though, do we go back to the technology now and try and prove that we were right all along? So we're caught in a little bit of a conundrum. So I don't have a good answer because technology didn't work for us in the past because interviewers were influencing the outcomes because they liked Mary or Joe and they their personality suited what they were looking for, whatever it is, and may or may not have been the best hire for KPMG, don't know. So when we got rid of that, what we found was then our applications over the last, when we got rid of that about 10 years ago, our applications doubled. So when we removed the barriers for applications and assessments, candidates showed up. So the quality of the candidate we got through just regular interviews and application forms improved because the volume went up and therefore more good candidates applied. Plenty of bad ones too, but more good ones. So any barriers that we put in place for the students created an issue for ourselves, and the students, what we found was anyway, went to the point of least resistance when it came down to employers. And that was a lesson for us in terms of whether the application or the assessment or whatever it is, we found that students just wouldn't even turn up for an assessment, haven't been screened and scheduled and whatnot. And it was all to do with time. In their mind, their time was more valuable than turning up. So don't have an answer to the question. It is the $1 million question. I don't know, as it's back to what we said, training the interviewers better and seeing will the application and old interview style work better, or whether we need to really watch that and do something very, very different. Just not sure yet.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Siobhan. Emer had a question there.
Yeah, thanks. It's following on. It's a very interesting discussion. It's following on from Meg's question about the CV, and it made me think a little bit further about, okay, so there's what messages to students about how you could use ChatGPT and things to help them with their applications. And then it also makes me think about, I guess a lot of us have things like VMOC CV checkers and things that'll do AI CV checks. And also some of the larger firms as well do the screening of the CVs through things. And I asked our pal Alice here that Mary put in the chat, how does she see the future of AI processes affecting the recruiter on the other end, the actual graduate selection recruitment processes? And so I shared it in the chat there, so you could see it talks about, I suppose, with AI for screening of CVs potentially, or we have AI potentially, the trainer that you could be training could be the like of an Alice, and even sort of data analytics and things to help to sort of rematch candidates in a different way. I'm not expecting Paul and Siobhan to have the answer to this question straight on in this thing, by the way, but it just made me sort of thinking that, and the pace of this, the pace at which we're seeing this is incredible. So we're in a context where maybe in the next few years we could be seeing a lot more of that, of the AI screening of the things, so that the piece that Paul's talking about as well, the number of candidates that is resolved by AI screening all of those. Potentially, but what is your view as a recruiter on the other end of how fast in practice this is likely to change, or are you like the rest of us so busy saying, "Oh right, here's the next thing. This is very good. This is cool, whatever," and it's just the scale and the pace of change. How might that affect the student on the other end?
We're definitely only at the tip of the iceberg. There's no doubt about that. We feel that, as well as their day job, I have 4 people in my team looking at this from every angle to see what can we do to our advantage, whether it's screening candidates, whether it's advertising roles, writing job specs, creating better style interview questions, techniques, removing bias, removing even a job description, for example, can be more masculine than feminine, removing those type of things. The screening CVs, we've talked about that. We're looking at see how we can make the technology work for us. Really nervous about the bias that's already built into the technology in the first place. Great example we had was we asked AI to show us a picture of a pilot and a co-pilot, and both were middle-aged men. And we asked them to add in some balance into it, and it came back with one Latino and one white man. We actually had to ask for the female to be put in, and I suppose therein lies the danger. It's such an obvious one to pick out when you'd see it like that, but what are the ones that are not obvious? And so I think we're really guarded around what we're doing at the moment and being very, very careful then at what we're going to do. But back to the point, I think literally we've just started the journey. You know, this is the Industrial Revolution in 1850, and everything is going to change whether we like it or not. And the gas thing is we don't even know what that change is yet. We're only asking ourselves questions. So I guess we have 4 or 5 things we're trialing in KPMG at the moment. My own team, I have 4 people working on it along with their day job. That's replicated right across the firm in every department. And it's really, I suppose, to avoid being left behind. I think that's the real fear, that technology will pass you out and you'll become irrelevant, either as an employer with candidates, or too expensive, or your clients aren't recognizing that you're up to speed with everything. So while there's a lot of good in there, I think healthy apprehension is good as well, where you're just recognizing that you don't know everything, but you're embracing it as it comes along, and you're saying yes or no based on your trialing it and see will it work for you. And I think we could have the same conversation in 3 months' time, and it could be very, very different in terms of what we're doing and so on. So it definitely feels, as I say, beginning of the Industrial Revolution, Mark II.
I won't echo everything. I agree with everything Paul said, and I would echo the sentiments that we're doing a lot of reviewing as well ourselves internally. The one thing I will say is that we did, during 2 years ago, we did look at the asynchronous video tool we use. There is an option to use AI to do an analysis in the background as part of that. We trialed it in parallel with our reviewing the videos as we went through it. And it wasn't a reliable tool from our perspective. There's a lot of glitches in terms of not recognizing accents or different words or things like that. And we just felt it wasn't viable for us to rely on that aspect. It will continue to improve with things like that, but right now it's all up for grabs, and I suppose you can't rush into it either, because you just have to make sure it's a considered approach and that's right for your organization.
Okay, I know there's more kind of, sorry, Emer, there's more kind of questions coming in, and I'm conscious it is 1 o'clock, and we've probably taken Siobhan, Marie's and Paul's lunch hour as well. But thank you very much. I think it was very informative. I really appreciate you giving your time to share it with us. And again, Paul and Siobhan, you've always been great supporters of AHECS. And again, thanks a million for your continued support. So thanks everybody for coming on the call as well. We see you all at the awards and wish you all the very best as well. And so thanks a million, and thanks to Caroline for coordinating it as usual. She does a great job, and I say there's lots of nice messages coming in and great feedback there. So thank you very much. And again, we will have the video up on our YouTube channel, and we're happy to share with Siobhan as well, and Paul, if that's any use to you. So thanks very much, and enjoy
Thanks,
the rest
everyone.
of the day. Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.